So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to part one of the Gateway Employment Nexus's Collaboration with Purpose webinar series. My name is Jason Hartsfield, Disability Inclusion Lead Consultant with Starclough Disability Institute and a member of the Gateway Employment Nexus Steering Committee. I'll be your technical support for today. We invite you to share your name in the chat along with the organization you're representing if you would like to. Before we begin, there are a couple of housekeeping things I want to cover. We are using Zoom's auto captions feature. If you'd like to turn on captions, you'll see you can navigate to the captions icon at the bottom of your screen and select show captions. As you probably heard, this meeting is being recorded and will be available upon request. You can email us at mogatewaynexus@gmail.com. I'll put that in the chat if you'd like to request a copy. We will be taking questions for our panelists. If you have a question, we ask that you please use the Q&A feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues, you can message me in the chat directly. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Gateway Employment Nexus is a collaborative effort between employers and service providers representing St. Louis City and County, St. Charles County, and Franklin and Jefferson counties. The mission of the Gateway Employment Nexus is to leverage career opportunities for individuals with barriers to employment through collaboration and business partnerships. The Gateway Nexus meets on the second Friday of every month to network virtually, to network and share job leads and training opportunities. We have an email partners that can use to ask questions and share job leads. And we provide professional development opportunities like the one we're offering today. The Collaboration with Purpose four-part webinar series is designed to improve collaboration by educating each other about our roles and responsibilities within our organizations. Through this mutual understanding, we will better meet the needs of our Nexus partners and those we support. Today, we are excited to be joined by Dr. Colin Willis, the IO Psychology Program Manager at HireVue, Christa Martin, Disability and Community Outreach Specialist at DirectEmployers Association, and Jim Beirne, Implementation Consultant and Employability for Higher Education at World Bank Group. They'll be giving us insights into the roles and responsibilities of recruiters and talent acquisition professionals, along with some of the technology they use in hiring. And with that, I'll hand it over to my fellow Nexus Steering Committee member, Marissa Hyatt, Disability and Inclusion Operations Manager with Mercy Healthcare. Take it away, Marissa.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome, everyone. This is exciting for the Gateway Nexus to be hosting this webinar and starting this series that we are going to hopefully find very valuable. I was going through the attendee list and I see some really familiar names of great community partners and job developers and people in our community that are helping individuals with barriers to employment find jobs. So I'm so excited you guys are taking your lunch hour to be with us. And so again, I think the chat should be enabled now. And of course, that Q&A is available as well. And so we're very excited to have our three panelists, like Jason introduced them, all with great knowledge. So please feel free to ask questions throughout this because this is your chance. So I'm going to kick it off by asking Jim a question. So walk us through the experience of being a recruiter. What kind of background does a recruiter usually have? And what does their day-to-day look like? Uh-oh, Jim, I think you're frozen.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you right now.
Great.
There we go.
Okay. It's a great question that most candidates don't really think a whole lot about, and they really should know this. A recruiter could be anybody. And let me give you some examples. They could have very different roles and perspectives. They could be an HR generalist just rotating through a position for a year or two. They could be a line manager who is overseeing the whole process. I think someone's kid got sick and they had to show up and interview because they couldn't let the interviewee down. Or they could be a professional with 5 or 10 or 15 years experience who knows everything about recruiting, interviewing, and the process itself. So I think to the degree that a candidate can understand who they're speaking with, that's kind of like mission number one. The other issue is when we talk about recruiting and interviewing, there's a huge difference between a phone interview, a face-to-face interview, a virtual interview. Is this a first round interview? Is it a final interview? All of these questions should be thought through before a candidate gets in front of a recruiter, one way or the other. I think it's also critical for candidates to know what the specific requirements are, how they match up to them, and where they don't match, and what they're going to say about that. Again, when they're thinking about who's on the other side of this whole decision process. One final comment I make at this moment is, having been on both sides of this equation for decades, most interviewers are not very good. And so it's up to the candidate with objectives to fully understand the job and how they match to it or not, and to take control at times. In my experience, the more senior the less systematized and organized they are. And so again, it's up to the candidate to really take control as needed to make sure they get the benefits of why this organization needs them across.
Jim, can I
Stop.
Can I ask you to repeat your last comment? The internet is going
Yeah.
in and out, and we're losing about half of what you said.
For the moment. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Should I start from the beginning, or just, I think in a summary that a recruiter could be anyone, and a candidate has to be prepared to talk to someone who may be their potential boss, someone they never see again, but someone they have to impress to get to the next round. So they need to be prepared to deliver the benefits that they would bring to that hiring organization. And they need to understand where they are in the process. Is this first round, second round, final round? Are there more assessments? Are there more interviews coming down the pike? I think all those things are important from the candidate's perspective.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Christa or Colin, do you have anything you'd like to expand on that?
No, I would just kind of echo a lot of what Jim said. It lines up with a lot of what I've seen and experienced. I'll say on the technology side of things, one of the promising trends I see there, kind of building off what Jim said, is trying to build technology to allow organizations to scale some of those best practices. Right, Jim mentioned interviews that are better or worse, and that's absolutely true. And there's HireVue builds technology that is trying to scale some of that best practices of interviewing in the same way other assessment vendors are trying to measure knowledge, skills, and abilities via tests. We'll talk a little bit about resume screening in a bit, but there's upcoming technology there as well, trying to really move away from some things that are problematic in the sense of like years of experience and education that can be barriers for some candidates, and instead emphasizing skills, knowledge, and abilities. So as we kind of dive into technology, I'll talk a little bit about how that can help bring some of those best practices and kind of avoid situations where your more senior folk, for example, might be using kind of ad hoc or kind of off the cuff type techniques that aren't going to be as effective in the hiring process.
Thank you, Colin. Christa, did you have a thought?
Yeah, just to build on Jim, that was a fantastic summary, by the way, because you don't know who's on the other end. If it is somebody who, that could be their first day, versus somebody with 30 years of experience that has, maybe their own little techniques, tricks, processes that aren't as formalized or as uniform, as others maybe that are following more of a script. And I don't want to jump ahead of ourselves in the technology discussion, especially in regards to AI and the resumes and all that. But yeah, knowing who's on the other end and just thinking, this could be the hiring authority. You don't know. And because you don't know, you have to approach it as such. Same thing with cover letters. They say 50% of HR want it, 50% don't. But we don't know who that 50% is on the other end. So I always suggest a caution on the side of error and throw it in there. If they don't review it, they don't review it. But if they wanted that, it's there. So it's, you know, the old adage, it's better to, have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Thank you, Christa. Jim, just to kind of continue with the recruiter conversation. So a lot of our job developers or vocational rehabilitation counselors are interacting with employers. And so is there any anything they can prepare or questions? I'm really throwing this off the cuff. You know, any questions they can ask the recruiter to help prepare them or their candidate? You know, how do you work together in that way?
You broke up a little bit there, Marissa.
Oh, sorry, Jim. I was just curious if
Yeah,
you
well,
had any
I think
advice.
as a
Oh,
job
go ahead.
developer, I would want to know.
You're frozen.
Yeah.
Oh, there
Yeah,
we go.
I would think that if I was a job developer, I would want to know what are the needs of the organization, specific, either technical skills or more evergreen, durable, you know, soft skills, whatever you want to call them, so that you could then go back to your candidates and help inform them of what they need to know, what they need to distinguish. And to the degree the job developer knows that those needs, then I think then they can help inform their candidate pool a lot better.
Thank you, Jim. All right, Colin, this is for you. So ZipRecruiter's CEO, Ian Siegel, recently said that up to 75% of resumes are rejected before they are even seen by a human being. What do people need to know about the automation in the hiring process to maximize their chances for success?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll start actually with an anecdote about hiring for someone on my team this past fall. So my team is a team of biopsychologists. When we're looking for a new consultant, we're looking for someone who has a master's or a PhD in biopsychology, and typically somewhere between 1 and 3 years of experience specifically in assessments. So the subfield of biopsychology that's looking at how to measure knowledge, skills, and abilities as part of the hiring process. When we opened up that position in the fall, we wanted to hire one person, and we got 400 applicants in a little under 2 weeks. And I don't think I have to really belabor the point that, it's a pretty niche field, right? That's, there's not a lot of biopsychologists, there's not a lot of IOs in assessment. So 400 is a pretty high to get for such a position being open. So just taking all that at face value, 99.75% of those candidates are not getting the job, right? 400 applicants, one person's getting hired. So one thing I want to highlight really is that it's always going to be a numbers game. And some of the things I'll share about kind of recommendations will be, how to tip some of those odds in your favor. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot more candidates than there are open positions. We had someone on my team review all of the resumes. So it was a manual screen, not an automated screen. And she moved forward 40 of those candidates out of the 400. So a 90% rejection rate, in other words, so even higher than ZipRecruiter's figure there. And a large reason there is because most of those candidates didn't have the requisite kind of background, right? We look for that kind of background just because that's, our field is so based off of those educational requirements, at kind of this level. And we were even looking for candidates who were, adjacent, right? Like didn't have to actually, once we got down to it, didn't have to be an IO degree, as long as it was, close enough. If you had similar experience, you probably got moved forward to the next step too. So we were really looking broader than what the requirements said, and we still only moved forward 40. And so I say all that because that's really what an automated screening process is trying to help with, right? If I'm a recruiter, or if in my case, another IO looking at candidates to hire, that's a lot of resumes to wade through and then make decisions about and move forward. And that's that whole idea of technology, right? Is to either improve something efficiency wise and making sure that time is used appropriately by people whose time is valuable, while still making good decisions, right? And so that's where a lot of this comes from. we actually just recently, now kind of moving forward a little bit, we actually just recently just finished surveying about 4,000 hiring managers about trends in hiring. And there's 3 trends that I think are really promising for this discussion. The first of which is that we see about a 50% uptick in the emphasis of skills in kind of automated selection processes over things like education and years of experience. And that's a really important point because we find in the scientific literature that skills predict job performance, years of experience and where you went to school don't. So it's a really important shift in the market right now, looking at the measurement of skills and knowledge and abilities as part of the hiring process. And that's something that technology is now starting to kind of catch up with, whereas before you'd really need a person to look at those things. And that's why we see kind of the shift in resume screening from knocking out on keywords versus now more sophisticated artificial intelligence models that are really looking at clusters of skills and content to move people forward or not. The next biggest trend is a really, really big uptick in companies' concern about disabled candidates, diverse candidates, and particularly neurodivergent candidates. We saw that 60% of respondents now have an emphasis on neurodivergent hiring. So that would be, for anyone who doesn't know, conditions like autism, ADHD, OCD, things that have typically been considered disabilities under the American with Disabilities Act, but have now kind of gotten this more widespread acceptance as just something that's different about how we think versus a tried and true sort of physical disability. So organizations are really paying attention to that because this is a group of people who've had a lot of barriers to get hired, but are just as qualified, just as interested in working as anybody else, and have been sort of systematically deselected in processes because they think a little bit differently and act socially a little bit differently than the norm. So that's a really encouraging trend as well. The last really encouraging trend, at least in my mind, of course, have a bias here, is organizations are spending a lot more on technology. So even as there's a change in the labor market and there's labor shortages, the way that organizations are in part addressing that is investing more into technology to assist with hiring. So they're investing in sort of different kinds of AI, chatbots, resume screeners, video interviewing, you name it. That's where the kind of the investments are going. And I think that's really encouraging because there's, of course, technology is going to be a tool. It can be used well or it can be used poorly, but technology that is used well can be really helpful for candidates who traditionally struggle with getting employment. You can take a video interview from the comfort of your home. You can take a asynchronous video interview on your own time, after work or in a setting that's comfortable to you, which is huge when you're an employee who is maybe working 2 jobs, right? You're trying to support the family on 1 income. You really can't take time off to go interview. So that's a huge barrier to finding a better opportunity. So being able to go and start a selection process and a hiring process on your own time is a really big benefit. And that's what technology helps enable. So kind of shifting from those trends that we're seeing, some of the recommendations I would make, specifically with respect to getting past that resume barrier, right? That 75% mark. Few things kind of building off of that trend piece. It's really, emphasizing the skills in your resume. So what are you doing? What are you good at? What do you know? What are some of the capabilities that you can bring to an organization? And now we have a little bit less concern about where did you go to school? How many years of experience do you have? That's less important than just showing and demonstrating the capabilities that you can bring to the organization. So that's a huge step forward in how you would kind of write and conceptualize your resume. Second one is a kind of a broader recommendation around just applying to jobs. What we find are minority candidates, women, people with disabilities, people with different backgrounds that create barriers to employment are less likely to apply to jobs that they think that they're not qualified for. Groups like white men are way more likely to apply to a job that they don't meet all the qualifications for. So that creates a disparity in that initial kind of screening process, right? Because we're going to see an overrepresentation of some groups and an underrepresentation of others, simply because of how you perceive you being qualified. So my recommendation to anyone is, after you get past that skills piece, really think about applying to that job, even if it feels like you don't meet all of the requirements, because chances are no one else does either, right? And you don't know that, so you want to put yourself out there as much as you can. Then the next step, yeah, Jason.
Sorry, we have a question from the Q&A, should people tell on an application or resume that they are in one of those categories you mentioned, like neurodivergent?
Yeah, disclosure is a kind of a tricky subject, and it really depends. And I think actually goes back to a lot of what Jim was saying around knowing your recruiter, knowing what the process involves, kind of feeling out what the right time is for something like that, and to what extent is it helpful to you to disclose. Some extent it might be, to get an accommodation, right? And so that can be a very helpful reason to disclose. Or you might have gotten the sense from an organization that they're very inclusive, and so you're going to be better supported in the process, revealing a little bit more about yourself. But it's always going to be on a case-by-case basis. And going back to Jim's points, really, going to be about understanding your recruiter and the hiring process and knowing what the right time is to make a disclosure like that. What we see in the literature is that a lot of hiring managers don't get the requisite training to handle disclosure. And so that is one barrier that candidates face, is a manager who might be very well-intentioned, but doesn't know how to handle an ADA type disclosure accommodation request. They might become uncomfortable, and then, that might change the mood or the kind of attitude in an interview. And so that's why it's always kind of difficult to make a kind of a broad recommendation, but you can absolutely kind of try and feel that out during the process.
Yeah, and I would just add, Colin took the words out of my mouth, that probably a good way to consider it is to see, are there any advocates in the organization that will help support you? Because it is really tricky, what, when, and how you do it.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on that too. There's an art to disclosure. Yeah, the how, the when, the why. But I want to make a distinction between self-ID in the application process versus disclosure through the application resume, or cover letter or other means, because that's not accommodation related. A lot of folks, aren't well informed on the self-ID process, why that's included, that when they self-ID or identify in any of those groups, whether it's a, military or individual with a disability or other minority that they're screening for in that process, that's part of, their part in federal contracting requirement, and that's not capped with the application. The hiring manager does not know that you've disclosed through that self-ID, and that actually is really beneficial to the company and to improving culture and supports and those champions in the organization, so that they can see, where they're doing well, but also where they're lacking in those initiatives to recruit and retain qualified candidates, that fall under those population and those categories. So, and I think we're also seeing this shift, like Colin said, to competency-based and skill-based hiring. We've recently had several states pass legislation where the state government's personnel cabinets they're doing away with the 4-year degree requirement. They're, and other things like that. And to attest to the AI and the algorithms part too, that you said on those competency, those skills, those achievements, versus the years of experience, where we can also run into ageism discrimination. Well, I graduated from MIT, but it was in 1976. So, we're also, run into all these other isms that we could come up against. And Deborah had put in the Q&A too, do you have a skills-based resume format that you like to use? And there are competency-based resume formats that you can utilize, especially when people lack that work experience or those years of experience. Maybe they're, first time, job seekers, or, they have unpaid experience versus paid experience, especially when we're working with transition age youth, for those of you that work in those populations, but that there are resume formats available for that to highlight, competency and skills versus the traditional resume format. So.
Yeah, Christa, those are all excellent points. A couple I want to emphasize around that self-ID, at that initial application stage. I see so much like online, perceptions that that's going to be used as part of the application, that people are going to make decisions about who to hire based upon, what race you disclose, et cetera. And like you said, not only is that not true, the other way that that data is really critical is actually in the kind of auditing of automated systems, be that a resume screen or an assessment that you take or a video interview, because that's the data that we use to assess for adverse impact and look at the passing rate differences across those different groups and make sure that they're all kind of within the same bands as each other. So that data is really crucial actually to making the hiring process as fair as possible. And then, of course, having downstream inclusivity effects for the organization as you're bringing in more diverse candidates that way. And then that second piece on you mentioned on the skills for the resume is huge too, but that age gap, if you think about formerly incarcerated individuals who are going to have, of course, gaps in a resume, or a caregiver role where you have to take time off to care for a child or an aging parent, or someone who's sick in the family. These are all gaps that could potentially be problematic. But if you take a skills-based approach in the resume, those all go away, right? And that's a huge thing too with this shift.
Well, and I'm going to say just on that, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's recently been shown that 2/3 of resumes have those employment gaps. And a lot of job developers and employment specialists have a hard time. How do I get past that gap, or how do I explain that gap? But now those systems and those algorithms are having to account for that when 66+% of them have those gaps. And so that's not as much of a barrier as it was previously in the hiring and recruitment process, I think, because they're having to take that into account, and especially in the post-COVID world, we're seeing that more and more. So that's very much on the forefront, I think, in the recruitment process.
Yeah, and then just kind of wrapping up my points, the other recommendations that I had, one, actually this I think really echoes Jim's point, is getting to know the hiring manager, the recruiter, as part of that initial submission process. You see on LinkedIn especially a lot, the platform encourages this to an extent, go apply for this job, and then here's the recruiter or hiring manager associated with the job rec, and go introduce yourself, kind of thing. And that's a really great way of separating yourself from a lot of the passive candidates. I can say out of those 400 candidates who came into that IO job I mentioned at the beginning, no one did that. But if someone had done that and said, hey, maybe my resume looks a little bit different than what you're looking for, but I think I'm a good fit because of X, Y, or Z, they're probably gonna get through to the next step, right? They've made a personal connection, they've made a bit of an effort there that shows that they're really interested in the job, versus the other 399 who didn't do that. And then lastly, going back to my first point, it's still a numbers game, right? And that's so rejection is going to happen. It happens to all of us, and it can be really hard to not take it personally. And because you're putting yourself out there as a candidate into a process that feels very vulnerable. You're kind of putting all of your work experience, what you might feel like is your value to society, after judgment, and to get a no back is really hard to hear. But thinking about the number of candidates to the number of open positions, it's bound to happen. And so it's advantageous to have a bit of a thick skin and handle the rejection and move on to the next opportunity and not take it too personally.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. So just to circle back about your LinkedIn comment, do you think that is a platform that our community partners should be helping candidates utilize more? Are people seeing, I remember when LinkedIn first came out, I don't think it was really as employers weren't using it as much. Are we seeing a shift in that?
Yes and no. So what I would say is, some of the tried and true tactics, like finding a job on LinkedIn or a job board, but then going to that company, their career site, and applying to that career site directly, that stuff still applies. I think, the apply through LinkedIn is, there's a lot that goes on there that makes, triaging all that traffic into a specific job hard to handle for a lot of companies. But what LinkedIn is really good at is telling you who are the people associated with that company or with that job, right? And that's what you miss on the job board side of things otherwise. So being able to go and say, here's a job I'm interested in. Oh, and here's the recruiter, or here's the hiring manager, and here's a place for me to go send them a message. That's what's really valuable.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'd add one further thing to LinkedIn. I think it's critical and essential. And if you're not on LinkedIn, good luck. Your odds are less than 1 in 100. But what most candidates haven't figured out is the LinkedIn company profile is where the company is pushing out their employability brand. And it's where they have all their jobs posted, and they're telling you what their ERGs, employer resource groups are, and they're telling you what it's like to work at Procter & Gamble. You may love their products, but is it a good place to work? They're two very different things. And if you go on the LinkedIn company site versus the website on the internet, you can get much richer cultural insight into what it's like to work there.
That's a very good point, Jim. Very good point. Awesome. Well, Christa, you're up next. Are you ready?
I am. And I do want to say real quick on the LinkedIn point, that is your professional social network. It really has changed the game. And if you're not on LinkedIn, you need to be. And if you think companies aren't Facebook stalking you or social media stalking you or trying to figure out who you are before, in advance of things, they are. They're going to look for your profile on LinkedIn. They're going to look at your other social media presence, as well. So, sometimes you may have to clean up the digital dirt, as we call it, during that application and job seeking process. And I think too, to what Colin said, a couple quick things is, if you meet the minimum qualifications, apply. Doesn't matter if you meet the preferred qualifications. You don't have to be the most qualified candidate. You just have to be the most qualified candidate that applies. Throw your hat in the ring. Put yourself out there. Rejection's part of it, the application process and all that. It's just the necessary, evil. It's going to happen. And so, it's important on the job developer side and the VR side that, you are that source of positivity and support and encouragement and that beacon of hope, because it can get very hopeless. I've had folks that, Yale grads, applied to 1,000 positions, getting 0 responses. And then you imagine the barriers that our clients face in the job seeking process. Oh my goodness, but you keep at it. And you keep encouraging and you keep applying and you keep interviewing and you keep going. Once you know better, you do better, right? So, it's just a continual thing. And then one day you're going to be sharing your moment, right? And how you got connected to, your next step in your, career pathway. So.
Yes, Christa, good point. At our Gateway Nexus meetings, we always start off our meeting with a mission moment. And that includes how the group connected a job developer to an employer and helped someone get further along in their career. So definitely a good plug on that one, Christa. Thank you.
I'm shamelessness. It's one of my
I
superpowers.
know. I'll take
Yeah.
it. So we would love for all of you on this call to be part of our mission moments. So Christa, in your experience, how does a service provider build a meaningful relationship with a hiring manager? What can service providers offer to build buy-in for their population?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think right now we are at a critical time in our culture, and especially with the push in the DEIAB plus in the HR side of things, to really tap into the untapped talent pool that is people with disabilities, the reentry population, veterans, other minorities. But the unique thing about, people with disabilities is it crosses over every other classification. You can be born with it. You can acquire it. It doesn't matter your race, sexual orientation, gender, anything, age, anything else. It is our largest minority in the country, in the world. And our workforce, whether employers know it or not, 25 to 30% are probably individuals with disabilities, if not more. And as far as, building that relationship, oh my goodness. I think one of the best things that on the developer side and, for employment specialists, business relations folks is, you go where the employers go. Get with your chamber, get with your SHRM, get with your Nexus group, get with, where these connections are being made, for one, do your homework, do your footwork, as I like to call it, show up. Go into a business. Like, I think, you know, when COVID happened and we were all at home and then nobody was going anywhere and we weren't meeting in person and all that, like, we forgot about that, but that's where the relationships happen. And the fact is, you're always on. You could be standing in line at Speedway and you overhear somebody getting a job and you're like, oh, hey, you know, and you make those connections. Again, you have to be shameless, y'all. That's just part of it. You know, you can't be, don't be scared to, you know, walk up to somebody and start those conversations, and put yourself out there and get involved in those groups and those areas, you know, like this. HireVue, like I said, we love HireVue as a, you know, member of the association. I did shamelessly put in the ability site for the U.S. National Labor Exchange that we co-host, as well as DE Jobs, which puts you on a global level in your search for jobs, internships, and apprenticeships, and engaging those employers. So it's a multi-purpose, multifunctional, you know, tool that can be used. And when you're doing that research on a company, looking at their culture, looking at those DEIAB strategies, how inclusive and accessible are they? You know, I'm of the mind that, you know, if you're not accessible, you're not inclusive. You know, that's a, you know, problem. We want to shift the needle, you know, and really to move the employment and advancement of people with disabilities in the workforce. And it really is all about relationships. You know, nobody pays dues to the Chamber of Commerce just to be a member of the Chamber of Commerce. It's about those connections and those relationships. And I think, you know, Colin made a really good point where you can, anytime you can make that personal connection with a hiring authority or with that manager, the better. Whether it's, you know, hey, we're both, you know, Mizzou fans, or, you know, we all hate Duke, whatever, you know, however you can connect, you know, with March Madness. Can we all just give a shout out to Tennessee for knocking Duke out of the bracket? Just saying. I apologize for any Duke fans out there. Yeah. But any way that you can make those personal connections. Oh, is that political? I don't know. Is it? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You know, but yeah, I mean, that's really what it's about. You know, and being respectful of their time, you know, being respectful of their needs. You know, you're not going to start out with your, you know, your sales pitch, so to speak, or your elevator, you know, it's really doing those informational interviews and site visits and, you know, finding out what they need. And a lot of times an employer has needs that they don't even know exist. And that's where I think the beautiful part of supported and customized employment comes in, that a lot of employers aren't as familiar with. And so it also leans into the education piece. Like Colin said, you know, a lot of your mid-level managers and hiring authority, they might not know ADA. They may not know that somebody's disclosing because they're not using the words disclosure, or they're requesting an accommodation, but they're not using the words reasonable accommodation. They may not be as familiar, you know, with the law and how that interactive process works. And I think that's where the great thing is with our community rehabilitation programs and providers, and vocational rehabilitation services for the blinds, you know, having that advocate, that ally, you know, and somebody to help you navigate that process as a job seeker and a qualified candidate really is so beneficial. But then on that level, they need to educate themselves too. You can't advocate for your clients or help them to be better self-advocates if you don't know their rights. So then it's on them as professionals to increase their professional competencies and development to be able to be the best advocate and ally, you know, that they can for the populations that they serve. So I hope that's not too of a long-winded response.
No, I don't think
got
so.
Too far in the weeds with the March Madness, but you know.
You know, Christa, I think you've made some really great points. It's all relationship building. And I think for most of us who get into this field, we like people and we want to connect with people and we want to connect people to people. But is there any advice for those out there that it's hard to manage that time, because relationships take time to build? And then we also have to balance working with the individuals and the paperwork that goes around with it. So how do you foster these relationships and continue to foster them without the time, and no one has the time? So what are some thoughts on that?
Oh my goodness. Well, I
Jim's
guess it goes
laughing.
into time management. There's never enough time in the day, right? So you have to maximize your time wherever you can. You have to plan accordingly and prioritize and all those things. And you know, some people find it beneficial to live out of a date book and calendar and reminders and alarms and things like that. You know, God bless Salesforce for, you know, some of that case management side of things, of reminding you when to follow up or how to follow up. But it's a long game. Relationships aren't built in an informational interview. It takes more than that. It takes more than just one chamber meeting, more than just one. It really is. It's a long game. Those relationships aren't going to be done or built overnight. And then you also have to consider multicultural competencies as well. If you're working in different groups within their cultural and social framework. I work heavily in Indian country with Native American and Alaskan natives. You know, it's different working in that space than working with general VR, working with the tribal VR system. And so I think it's like Colin had said, it's a case by case, it's a person by person, you know, basis. And you have to, you know, kind of get a feel for your audience, right? Know your audience, know who you're working with. Know if you're working with a type A who's stressed for time, I got 15 minutes, get it all in here and, you know, get out, versus, hey, let's go have a cup of coffee, have lunch, you know, something more casual, more leisure. You know, go to ribbon cuttings. Oh my gosh, like if you have chambers, you have ribbon cuttings, that's one of the great ways. Get in on the ground floor of a business opening up in your local community, you know, right? Because that's where everything happens too, is on that local level. And everywhere you go and everywhere you're a consumer of services at or goods, you know, it all matters, and it all comes full circle, and you never know where you're going to be or who you're going to be talking to. And then somebody behind you, you know, overhears you talking about something else. And then, you know, everything just keeps rolling from there. And Richard said it very early, you can't afford not to find the time. You have to find the time, but you have to be prepared for the long game. Because again, it's not going to happen overnight. So I hope that's helpful advice.
Yes, I think Jim wanted to hop in on this one too, because on the flip side, Jim, I'd like to know what recruiters think of building those relationships and what that looks like.
Well, to your question first, I wouldn't build the relationship so much with the recruiters as I would with people in the line in the organization that you want to work for, because they're the ones that can influence the recruiters. Recruiters are trying to make them happy. So if I had a choice, I would never talk to a recruiter. If I could talk to someone in the line, and I say that as a long-term recruiter. But the recruiter is a 2-year-old, and the recruiter, Colin talked about 1%, and I just want to echo that 1 out of 100 is your option if you are applying to a job. If you informational interview, you've increased your odds significantly, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 out of 100 chances. But recruiters are 2-year-olds. They're saying no all day long. But if a line manager comes to a recruiter and says, I was just talking to Mary and she's pretty impressive, I think you should talk to her, the recruiter is going to talk to her every time.
Good point.
And just one last data point, because you got to run this by data. And that's why I laughed about the time. You've got to have the time. Not too long ago, running Hewlett-Packard's recruiting, we hired 6,000 people a year, but we had 900,000 resumes in our database. So do you think we really care that you applied? No, we didn't. You have to apply, but you also have to network your way in in any way possible.
Thank you, Jim.
Does that
I know we're
go back to the, it's not what you know, it's who you know?
Exactly. Well, I know we do have some questions.
Yeah, we have a question related to that. We have 3 questions. First, I want to ask this question from Paul, who's been very patiently waiting. So Paul is asking about the automated application system. So some automated or bot interviews aren't disability friendly. He specifically cites deafness. How do you work around that? He adds that I know some companies refuse to change that approach or make it impossible to contact them to request a different way of interviewing. Before you answer, I'll give my 2 cents on this topic. Just real quick, guys. If you're running into that, that's a big red flag that company's not worth your candidate's time. I think we have to go from begging for attention to demanding it. Sometimes disclosure is a great way to test the waters. Sometimes, and I think the same way about how easy it is to get accommodation. But I'll shut up and ask you Paul's question. How do you navigate a situation where you can't use the automated interviewing?
Yeah, I'll build off of Jason, your comment, because I absolutely agree. I actually had a case with a customer not that long ago, a couple of weeks ago, where it was actually a deaf candidate who was struggling to get accommodations for HireVue. And it was really frustrating because there's a tension between vendors and employers or buyers, in the sense that speaking for HireVue, we have accommodation processes that we offer as part of the product, and customers can choose to use them or not. And this was a customer that chose not to use them, and then was upset that this candidate had a poor experience because there was no accommodation process for them. And I say that because as technology becomes more and more ingrained in society and processes like these, there's more and more stakeholders, right? It's not just the employer anymore. It's not just the vendor. There's this complicated mixture of systems going on. And sometimes it does impact people, and it's really frustrating when that happens. I'll say, just bringing it up, and Jason, like you said, it's good to test the waters. Like, it's a really great point, because that's how the change is going to happen and drive change in employers and in vendors. I'll say for HireVue, we, several years ago, were using, facial analytics as part of our algorithm. So facial movement, tone, things like that. And someone from this organization called Integrate Autism Employment Advisors reached out to us, and her name's Tracy Rudy. She's great. And she was like, hey, this is problematic for autistic candidates. Have you ever thought about that? And it got up to our CEO. He was like, no, we haven't thought about that. Let's talk more about it. And that led to us dropping those analytics from our product. We don't use them anymore. And it's led to a now really robust research program around the intersection of artificial intelligence and autism that we go and we present at different conferences and publish in papers. And it's been a great change. And it took someone saying, hey, this is a problem. Can we do something about it? And to HireVue's credit, we listened, but that's how change happens, is people saying, this is a problem, let's do something about it.
It's actually really,
Colin, I really want to quote Taylor Swift right now, but I won't. So Jason, go ahead.
Well, Colin's point is actually kind of, I think, Stephen's question, or Jeff Stevens' question, it builds on this. Any advice for job developers when an employer says they, quote, don't need assistance with hiring, or corporate handles applications and I can't go into the details with you?
A hard-hitting question.
Oh, I was like, I thought that was for you, Colin. I'm like, I'm happy to address
Yeah,
it. Oh, you cleared it off my screen. Now I can't see it. I need an accommodation, Jason. Let's see. Hang on. Let me go back.
You'll need to provide a doctor's note.
Oh, come on, man. Full self-disclosure, full transparency. Jim, do you want to take this one?
Well, my reaction is, and this is off the cuff, but is if you're getting blocked in a number of places where you're trying to get in, you probably don't want to work there. There are enough good enlightened organizations that really care, that are trying to identify in diverse individuals, that I would just spend my time focused on that and not try to boil the whole ocean. And that sounds rather niche, but I think there are enough organizations out there that you can focus on.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I echo that, because if you're telling me you don't need assistance with hiring, be serious. I've never met an employer that doesn't need assistance with recruitment and retention, and particularly in the field of, in DEIAB plus stuff. I mean, that's just foolhardy at best, that they're, trying to give you the brush off. And if that's the case, then do you really want your clients going to work in that kind of culture and environment. That's why I'm so glad Colin's here on the IO side, because I'm a geek when it comes to that stuff. So I think he can attest to that. If somebody's giving you the brush off saying, well, corporate handles that.
Yeah, I agree with both your points, Jim and Christa, and I think practically speaking, the most straightforward solution is right. Like, this is an organization I don't want to work for. Let me look somewhere else. I think to answer it more directly around, if you're in an organization where that's happening, or you're trying to work in an organization where that's not an option, that's why I was kind of really thinking about the answer, because it really comes down to change management, which is so hard to do in an organization, but so necessary in different ways. And then it really comes down to understanding where that resistance is coming from. Is that a hiring manager or a team that has their own processes that they've found work for them, and there's some confirmation bias going on, or they're just ignorant of the process and kind of the broader scope of why inclusion might be helpful, anything like that. And then it really comes down to, again, like a case-by-case basis of, this is what we want to do differently. This is why we think it'll help you. And, it's a difficult process. I know I have a colleague who works for one of the, very large tech companies, and her job is around structuring interviews, moving, basically software developer interviews from the craziness that they are currently to something that's a little bit more aligned to a competency framework, and asking the same questions again and again. And her job is basically presenting that to teams. And then if they say yes, she helps them, but oftentimes they say no, and she moves on to the next team. And so it becomes very team dependent within the larger organizations. There might be teams that are great and you would want to work for, but then there's some teams that no, like I would, skip over them entirely. But then you evaluate that whole organization level, and it's much harder to know what you're going to get. And then I think it goes back to Jim's original point around getting to know your recruiters and your team members, and try to find someone on the line or someone in the team and talk to them about what it's like, so that you get a better idea of what you're going to get yourself involved with.
We have a question from Catherine that has to do with LinkedIn. The majority of the candidates I work with are seeking entry-level jobs. Would it still be your suggestion to use LinkedIn as a resource for those? I always thought that was more for professional level opportunities. I think part of that question is distinguishing. There's entry-level post-high school jobs, and there's entry-level post-college jobs. So LinkedIn would work great for post-college jobs, but what about the entry-level post-high school?
Jim, you thinking?
Sorry, everybody froze there for a second. LinkedIn is, you've got to play. And so sooner or later, I think everybody needs to be on LinkedIn, and it's probably not the ideal place to find post-high school jobs, but there are many less than college grad jobs that are out there. So I think you've got to be in the game. You've got to play that game. I would never dismiss it as it's not necessary at any level.
And I think, for larger organizations that have such a wide variety, from those entry-level jobs all the way up to those C-suite jobs, I think LinkedIn's a great way. And Leslie, I believe it's Leslie Quarles, LQ, said, it's a good way, like Jim said, to see what their DEI focus is, get a good sense. I know for Mercy, we post a lot of positions of all levels on LinkedIn, along with those stories about our coworkers and things like that. So, maybe if it's not to look for jobs, but to learn more about that company, and maybe for the job developer to connect to those people, I think is a great way to use. I know I used to connect with HR all the time as a job developer and message them. So doesn't hurt, right, guys?
We can do a real
Well, and
quick
I think-
informal. Sorry, go ahead, Christa.
Oh, thank you. I think, there's still probably 60 to 80% of jobs are filled before even being posted. There is still very much the hidden job market going on, and it really is about networking, and networking with the networks you don't even think of, like whether it's your church congregation or volunteering at the Humane Society, all your networks, your friends, your family, your job developer, everybody, is connected to someone somewhere somehow. So really think about utilizing those. And if you have an opportunity to, participate in groups like the Nexus, or job clubs are fantastic. I'm a huge fan of job clubs around the country as well. Maybe we should start one, let me know. Are great ways to, just keep networking. So yeah, I think LinkedIn is essential, whether you're transition age youth, whether you're post-grad, wherever you are in your career process or pathway.
So I posted in the chat, real quick informal poll, if you'd like Nexus to consider or to host a webinar on how to use LinkedIn to network, you can raise your hand clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. So far, we're getting a good number of responses. So I think something to bring up in the steering committee.
Jason's always giving us more work to do, you guys. So, I know it's 1 o'clock on the dot. So if there's any other questions, please share with us. But in closing, we talked heavily about networking and getting to know both audiences. And so Gateway Nexus or your local Nexus is a great way to do that. So if you're not in the St. Louis area, we have Nexus groups all over the state of Missouri and Metro Illinois. And so this is a great way to build that network and start understanding the employers that are in your area, along with the resources that are available to you. So we'd love to see you at our next meeting, and you can reach out to Jason or myself if you have any questions on how to get connected. Any
Thank
other
you,
thoughts?
There
everyone.
is a question.
Sorry?
Did you see the question from Lisa? If they're registered
Will
for
we
this,
get
will they
the
get
part
invited to
two?
part 2?
There will be a second registration page coming out. We know it's going to be in July. We know we're going to be focusing on veterans. We know that we're going to be able to offer SHRM credits. So if you know anyone who's a member of SHRM, definitely let them know about it. We just don't have a final date yet. So once we have that, the information will go out. Everyone will get the link for the registration page for that one. So stay tuned. And as I said in the chat, I'm working on getting a YouTube page set up so that we can host these. So hopefully we'll have that by next couple of weeks, at which point you'll be able to share it with staff. It's a new experience for me.
We appreciate our panelists' time. Thank you so much for your knowledge and sharing and networking. So hopefully we can stay connected, and you could join us as a participant in our next one. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you
April
for having us.
14th, next.
Thanks for the
Thank
opportunity.
y'all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.